Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will from Star Hearth Astrology, and I am here today to do a kind of special lunation video for you guys. So normally, as you know, if you've been following me, I record videos for the new moons and the full moons. And I was sitting down to kind of do that for this coming eclipse and thought, because this is the last eclipse in the Gemini-Sag eclipse cycle, that I would do a retrospective for you. I think that astrology is probably even more useful in looking backwards than it is at looking forwards, right? We can only prepare forwards to the extent of our imagination, but looking backwards, we kind of know what happened. And so we can use the language of archetypes and astrology to kind of place and organize our experience. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, we want to do that because that is kind of the cornerstone of being happy with our lives and our identities, right? And there's so much language about resolving trauma and understanding our experiences. And really, when we can sort our experiences and feel like we kind of understand what happened, then no matter what happened, we are more grounded moving forward. And we have some kind of, we can feel empowered and like we can own our experiences. So we're going to look back at the 6 eclipses in the Gemini and Sag eclipse cycle. So from the times that the nodes went into Gemini and Sagittarius, we've been having eclipses on that axis about every 6 months since June of 2020. So what I want you to do when you're listening to this video, you don't have to do this, but what can be really helpful is to pull out your birth chart and kind of find those houses in your chart, find out where those eclipses have been happening. And, you know, if you've been following me, you probably have already done this because this is how my videos are based, is about looking at your chart and kind of, I give you the archetypal symbolism and then you apply it to your own chart because you are smart and you can do that. And you don't need anyone to kind of do the smoke and mirrors work for you. So pull it out. We are going to be talking about that. We are going to be looking at kind of the seesaw effect back and forth and trying to trace the unique storyline. I'm going to be sharing my story, but just as an example of how these eclipses have shown up in my life and kind of how I've seen their patterns. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's jump into it. We are going to start by looking at the first eclipse in this cycle. And so it was a Sagittarius lunar eclipse that happened right with the moon within 15 degrees of the south node. It happened on June 5th of 2020. So if you guys can remember all the way back then, what were we? We were 2 months in, 3 months in to lockdowns with COVID-19. Right around this time, right around these eclipses was when we saw the protests and the marches for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. This was Breonna Taylor's 27th birthday, I believe, was June 5th. And so we saw her march on the day of this eclipse. And what do we see? We see the moon in the sign of Sagittarius on the south node calling up the shadows of stuff that nobody wanted to, or that the dominant culture did not want to acknowledge as part of our culture. So that can be kind of part of Sagittarius. It has a creed. It can have blinders on to kind of to alternating kind of theories, right? And so the moon was like remembering that, was seeing that, was saying we feel that in our bodies. And so this was the first eclipse that we had. The sun was conjunct a retrograde Venus. So the social fabric was coming undone. And we opened this eclipse cycle with these eclipses. Now, this was the first one, and it was really weak. You can see how far away it is from the nodes. When they are farther away from the nodes, then we get these weaker eclipses. And so it was kind of an intro eclipse. And then what we ended up having after that was 2 more eclipses we had a full solar eclipse in Cancer and then a lunar eclipse in Capricorn, which was the close of the Cancer Capricorn cycle. And this is the opening of the Sagittarius cycle. So you really want to look at where Sagittarius falls in your chart for that. I know, so I am an Aquarius rising. Sagittarius is my 11th house of friends and groups. I was living in a very isolated location. I was about to have a baby. And so, right, it was kind of, I was feeling my lack of community in that. Yeah. And so I think that was kind of the piece. And when we're talking about solar eclipses, they're going to be more emotional. Eclipses on the South Node are going to be about what's lacking. So that was the first one. And I'd love to hear you guys in the comments. Let me know if you see the story arc of these eclipses as we go through them. Okay, the second one was also a lunar eclipse. So that happens on a full moon, right? But this was a Gemini lunar eclipse. So now we want to look at the house that is opposite to the Sagittarius house. And whole sign houses, they're all going to be, they're going to take up an entire house and they're going to be opposite each other. So the other thing that we can do is we can look at the degree of these eclipses. So if you have any natal placements in Gemini and Sag, we want to look at where the sun is, where the moon is, and what they might be falling on, because that is going to give you a more personal interpretation of what these eclipses are doing. So first we want to look at the house. That's going to matter. And then we want to look at anything in those signs in that house. So we had a Gemini eclipse on the North Node. North Node eclipses are hungry. They want to gather things in. They are about kind of reaching out and grabbing stuff. And so there can be a kind of fever pitch quality to lunar eclipses on the North Node because you have a full moon on the North Node. So you have this kind of moment of culmination and it's happening in this very hungry place of our chart. And so, yeah, there's a kind of pinnacle. Gemini in my chart falls in the 5th house of children, of creativity, of kind of joy and play. At this point, I have a child who has a Gemini ascendant, very much kind of falls into that space. And right at this point, we were through the 4th trimester and bonding a lot in that way. This eclipse, right, kind of connects us, right? Is what the eclipses are doing is they are binding those houses together, those signs together. They are pushing and pulling and massaging the axis of Gemini and Sag, bringing it closer together and expanding it and reinterpreting those archetypes, right? So the moon was pulling into my 5th house and I was spending a lot of time with my very young child. Come on, Zoom. Okay. Then the third one happened 2 weeks after that. So that was on December 14th. And that was our first solar eclipse in this cycle. And solar eclipses are significant because, right, they happen at new moons, which are the beginning of new things. So I see the lunar eclipses as kind of taking the temperature. So we had a lunar eclipse in Sag being like, okay, here's where we are. We got a lot of stuff we need to change collectively, obviously. And then we had this lunar eclipse in Gemini. Okay, taking the temperature in Gemini. The solar eclipses are going to be where we really kind of start making changes. So again, check, see if you have anything in your chart around 23 degrees of Sagittarius. I would give it about 3 degrees on either side as well. So we could say that this eclipse was conjunct Mercury on the South Node. This is about clearing out old stuff. This is about, right, starting new cycles by ending old ones. And this one was the first one that I really felt. And I don't know if it's because I'm a natal new moon, and so new moons tend to be more meaningful for my chart and my experience than full moons. Let me know how they were for you, because this one was significant for me because it happened in my 11th house of friendship, and I was able to, in these eclipses, kind of see where maybe if I had had an argument or a falling out with a friend in the past, I was better able to kind of see my role in that and where my pride or my communication style had gotten out of hand. And so what happened right after this eclipse was I reached out to some friends that I had had falling out with or kind of drifted apart from, and kind of wanted to come clean and acknowledge my role in that. And so that's part of this process. It's like, okay, I'm going to start this new cycle of honesty and accountability. And I'm also going to be able to notice that. And right, it's the sun that gets eclipsed. Our brain, I mean, not that the sun is just your brain, but the more like conscious in the sense of very cerebral part of us, wanting to figure things out and create symbolism, and has these storylines that it's going to be pushing. When the moon eclipses that, right, the more feminine side of our nature is kind of blotting out all of these ideas that normally dominate and parse out our reality. And so when that happens, we can connect to the more feminine, more connecting, more communal, more biological parts of ourselves. And it was with Mercury, which, spoiler, this December 4th eclipse is going to be the same thing. So it was very much about reach out, say something, and Mercury was in its detriment. So it was like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't know if this is okay. Some of them responded, some of them didn't. But it was important to do all the same, to kind of clear out those spaces and clear out those old storylines around what had happened in some certain friendships. Now, the other thing, Sagittarius is also the sign of the teacher. And this eclipse was when I launched my first 13 moons class and started teaching astrology for the first time. And that has been a big part of my experience of 2021. And it started right on this eclipse. So again, go back to the Sagittarius part of your chart. Notice if there were turning points in that area around those topics. And like the example I just used, yes, it can have to do with the house, so like friendship, but it can also do with the archetype of the sign. So Sagittarius is the archetype of the teacher and also the student, right? It's kind of this very intentional integration of knowledge that started right then. So that was our third eclipse in this cycle. Now, our fourth eclipse was a Sagittarius lunar eclipse, where we kind of check in on that. And so it was a lunar eclipse. Again, this one looks very close to the nodes, right? So it's very close to the nodes. The moon's on the south node. We're shedding things. It's square to Jupiter, the ruler, which is actually really helpful. It can make it kind of big and loud. We're just kind of we're kind of checking in on, we're culminating on how far we've come. And so at that point, I had completed my first class. I was in the middle of teaching my second class. There's this kind of culmination around that, and how much personally I learned through teaching these things. Not a very complicated eclipse as far as eclipse goes, and it's kind of tangling with outer planets. But yeah, so that was the May 26th, 2021. And now this next one, I think, is probably the most pivotal eclipse in this eclipse cycle, and I'll tell you why. So we've been going through these charts one by one. We've been seeing all of these lunar eclipses, so all of these full moons that represent a kind of culmination. And what has been rarer in this eclipse cycle, which wouldn't necessarily be true for other eclipse cycles, is the solar eclipses. So the December 14th one was a solar eclipse. Remember I said a new moon. It happens on a new moon. So it's a kind of new beginning. So we had one solar eclipse on the south node, clearing out old stuff, changing cycles, clearing out old stuff. Now, excuse me, I'm talking really fast. Okay. Now this one, we're going to have a solar eclipse on the north node. And this one is really singular in this eclipse cycle because we only have one of them. And this is the only one. So this was the June 10th one. And this one we had, right, when we look at the chart, we've got the sun and the moon at 19 degrees of Gemini, conjunct, very tightly conjunct a retrograde Mercury and Gemini. So we've got a retrograde Mercury in the sign of its rulership in Gemini on the north node. And remember, I said the north node is hungry. So from this June 10th eclipse, June 10th, 2021, so about 6 months ago, until a few weeks, we were really in the body and the energy of this eclipse. And this eclipse was kind of, the word I want to use is rabid, right? Gemini wants to try everything, wants to do everything. It doesn't want to miss out. Gemini and Sag have a big fear of FOMO. It looks a little bit different. Gemini is yes to everything. The north node is also this kind of insatiably hungry place. I think of it almost as the point of obsession. There's a point of fascination and obsession, and we can get really, really engaged in the area of our chart where our north node is. And so the north node in Gemini, right, was saying yes to everything. And we had this kind of new moon. And we had a Mercury retrograde. So the ruler of this lunation, right, was Mercury, the ruler of both the sun and the moon, conjunct them, combust, retrograde. So it's kind of a mess. And I don't really know anyone who's had the last 6 months not be kind of a mess. It's kind of like, okay, we decided we were going to do everything and we don't really know what we're doing. It's like, it's like we're off on a journey, but we don't know where we're going. And we don't even know why we're going there. And so there's a little bit of like, yes, we've experienced a lot of things. And I think a lot of people are coming into this kind of newness. But it's confusing about how it all fits together and how we're going to all find our way through this. There's lots of new stuff happening, but in some instances, we've started to do too many things at once. We've kind of said yes to too many things, and we're kind of feeling frayed and feeling frazzled. This is a very cerebral sign in Gemini. We've got so many ideas bouncing around in our heads, kind of getting lost just because of all of the disparate pieces. And we want to find a way to include them all. So you can check the house in where Gemini is in your chart and check for new storylines that began there. So the focus was really drawn away from the Sag part of our charts, which by and large, Sagittarius got kind of the lion's portion of these eclipses. Gemini has really had comparatively just not as many. Right, we've had 2 Gemini eclipses and 4 Sagittarius eclipses in this entire eclipse cycle. So this was the one chance to kind of start these new storylines on the north node in that house. I've had other people, just connect with their voice, start writing again. Right. And it's almost like we're just doing stuff. And because of COVID and lockdown and all this stuff, we're not quite sure how it all fits together. but we've generated a lot of content. Okay, and so now we'll see if this final Sagittarius eclipse can help us focus that back into something meaningful and kind of with a sense of mastery, which is what Sag does as opposed to Gemini. So here we come to this final eclipse, which is the final eclipse in our Sagittarius Gemini cycle for the next 9 years until the nodes will appear back in those signs, but they'll be opposite, right? So we have the South node in Sagittarius now and the North node in Gemini, and in 9 years they will be the opposite. So the North node will be in Sag and the South node will be in Gemini. This is also our second eclipse of eclipse season. So the current eclipse season that we're in straddled 2 signs. We had our first Scorpio Taurus eclipse, and we're having our final Sag Gemini eclipse. And so we've got a solar eclipse, again, a solar eclipse. So it's a new moon. It's in the sign of the South node. It is conjunct Mercury again, but this time, this Mercury is direct. It's in its detriment, but it's direct. This eclipse, I think, is about the hazards of taking shortcuts. Or could be the alternative. It could be the necessity to take shortcuts, the necessity to kind of cut some things out, to speak the truth, right? Mercurial topics. We had the North node in Gemini with our Mercury eclipse kind of gathering all of the stuff, different ways of thinking. And we will have this one on the South node for our kind of final 6-month period. So eclipses will kind of take sometimes a full 6 months for those storylines to kind of build, right? Until we have a Sag full moon, which would be the culmination of this storyline, but it won't be eclipsed. And so we've got our kind of final 6 months to clear out this space and reinvigorate the house that it exists in. So, right? So as I mentioned, my themes being around my child and my creativity and my community. During these eclipses, I moved. I'm trying to connect to new communities and reconnect to kind of other communities. Astrology has always kind of been my Sagittarius community because it's a community that's around a certain set of beliefs or curiosities or fascinations. And so, right, this final 6 months of how do I navigate that? How do I get out of my own way? And so too for you. And please feel free to put in the comments. You can ask questions about your own charts there. I'm open to helping you guys figure this out so that this material is meaningful. This eclipse happens kind of, not super involved with too many other things. We've got a quincunx from Uranus, which can make things feel a little bit more jittery and intense, but it's an eclipse, and eclipses often feel jittery and intense. And we're heading into these kind of deeper months of a Venus retrograde conjunct Pluto. And so we're ready to kind of take our final leap. I think in some mundane interpretations, right? Some of the things that we've seen, so some of the things that Sagittarius and Gemini generally represent are travel and education. And we have seen travel and education really deeply changed by the COVID-19 pandemic and right, the different lockdowns. And what we're seeing with this final Sagittarius eclipse is now with the Omicron variant popping up, all of a sudden, lots of travel bans happening again. I think we might see, if there are outbreaks, we might see schools shifting around, doing distance learning again, and kind of shifting those things around. And so I think right, we've got our final 6 months of that. And I don't think that the pandemic will be over now that we're not in this eclipse cycle, because I think the pandemic was more, it's related to other archetypal threads as well that we see in astrology. But these kind of deeper changes, we're having a kind of chapter change with them. And I think they're going to be more articulated. I think they're going to be more focused with Mercury and Sag, rather than kind of everything is included retrograde Mercury in Gemini. I think we're going to be able to communicate the changes in ourselves. And so it's more like, okay, I was doing everything and now I'm just going to be doing a few things. And I have a sense of what that is. And it's, I'm done clearing out the Sagittarius space, and kind of, I know what I want it to look like. And when the eclipses move out, then it will begin to kind of populate and normalize again. And the eclipses will move their focus into the Scorpio and Taurus houses. And that is where we'll start to see the kind of all of this dynamic energy to work those archetypes play out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Congrats if you made it this far in. Please like it, please share it. It makes a huge difference to me and what I'm able to bring you guys. And remember, eclipses are not a great time to do any kind of magic or any kind of manifesting. They're great times to kind of sit it out, let it wash over you, surrender to the process, and don't get tricked into thinking you have to do anything right now. Yeah, that's what I have for you. I will be back to talk about our first uneclipsed Gemini full moon in 2 years. That happens on December 18th. Remember, I also have a Venus retrograde kind of workshop, holding space, group ritual, where we'll go over the mythology and the archetypes, and have a group container as we all kind of shed our clothes as Venus is about to do in retrograde. Okay.